You park here again, and I'll have security escort you to the back entrance. The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. Elliot Crane stood beside his Bentley like it was a throne. His tone? Flat as granite. His smile? Corporate. Mariah Torres didn't flinch. She adjusted her son's backpack and said without raising her voice, "No need. I'll bring my other car tomorrow." He blinked, confused, and then smirked like she was telling a joke. But this wasn't a punchline. They mocked the single mom janitor for taking the bus. Tomorrow, she'd drive in as the company's new investor. Subscribe now if you've ever seen someone underestimated for so long that they stopped warning people. Mariah doesn't speak loud. She acts quiet. But when she moves, things break. She was the ghost in their hallways, the one they dismissed, until her name showed up where it mattered, on a contract they forgot. Mariah Torres, janitor, single mother, former biomedical engineer. Every mop stroke is a reminder that she built what they now pretend to own. She lost everything except her mind and her shares. She scrubs the corners of a building that wouldn't exist without her hands. Her son, Luca, watches her become invisible every morning. But not for long. Where are you watching from? Because Elliot Crane is about to learn something expensive. You don't mock the woman who wrote your code, especially not when she's coming back to collect. Mariah stepped off the city bus at 6:47 a.m. The hiss of the air brakes faded behind her as she adjusted the strap on her bag. She was on time. Always was. Virexon Biotech's campus stretched ahead of her like a glossy lie. Mirrored glass walls, manicured hedges, fountains timed to pulse every quarter hour, a building pretending to be alive. The Bentley arrived at 6:49. It slid into the executive lot like it belonged there, which it did. Elliot Crane stepped out before the engine fully quieted. Tailored black suit, frost blue tie, aviators already in place like armor. He smelled of cedar cologne and ego. Mariah kept walking. Her shoes squeaked on the pavement. No one looked twice, except Elliot. His eyes traced her ID badge, her janitor's shirt, the soft scuff on one pant leg, then drifted toward her son, Luca, seated on the edge of the sidewalk near the bench. A lunchbox sat beside him, unopened. Elliot didn't see the paleness in Luca's face. Or maybe he saw it and didn't care. Mariah leaned down, checked his thermos, smiled. Then the voice came, casual as cruelty. "You park here again, and I'll have security escort you to the back entrance." She stood, turned. No emotion. "I'd hate to scratch your paint," she said. "I'll bring my other car tomorrow." No anger. No pause. Just steel wrapped in cloth. Elliot blinked, unsure if it was sarcasm or delusion. Mariah kept walking. The lobby doors greeted her with a sigh of cold air. Lemon-scented polish hung in the atmosphere overhead. A digital display rotated through executive profiles, funding milestones, and marketing buzzwords. Series D secured. Global expansion. Founder legacy. Legacy. She passed the plaque. 4 names etched in chrome. Hers was not one of them. She used to be Mariah Virex. Until the divorce. Until the founder died. Until the boardroom turned into a boys' club, and she became a non-core contributor. Now they didn't even recognize her face. She cleaned around her own shadow. The executive elevator chimed. A man in a Navy suit stepped out, phone pressed to his ear, ranting about database latency. Mariah heard the buzzwords: glitching backend, neural loop misfire, packet loss. Her stomach tightened. They still hadn't fixed it. The bug she warned them about 4 years ago. The same one that could stall a live demo if too many users hit the node buffer. She made a mental note. Not because she planned to tell anyone, but because she wanted to see how long it took them to ask. She took the service elevator down to sublevel 2. The janitorial supply room smelled like bleach, pine, and resignation. She locked her phone in the wall safe. Company policy. Then opened her locker. Inside hung a zippered bag. Inside that, folded tight, were the original contracts and a name, her maiden name, that still held weight on paper. Just not in the room she used to walk into without permission. Not yet. Tomorrow, they'd see it on a different line. Investor of record. She glanced at her reflection in the dented metal panel behind the locker door. Hair pulled back. Tired eyes. Clean uniform. Calm breath. She'd waited long enough. She wiped her badge with her sleeve and stepped out. One more day. Mariah's mop moved in smooth, practice strokes across the glass tile floor, the same way she'd once maneuvered a stylus over neural interface schematics. The motions were different, but the rhythm, methodical, efficient, exact, remained the same. She didn't look up as two executives in patent leather shoes walked past her toward the elevators. Mid-conversation, their laughter echoing too loud for the hushed tone of the morning. She actually said she had another car. One of them snorted. What, a spare bus? The other chuckled. She must think this is some feel-good movie. Their footsteps faded. Mariah continued mopping. Not slower, not faster. The water on the floor reflected the curvature of the chandelier above. Organic, neural, patterned like the synapse model she'd submitted in a white paper 7 years ago. They hadn't even bothered to change it. At 7:12, she finished the north corridor and turned the cart toward the elevators. She tapped the button. It lit up. From behind her came the voice she expected. Thin, clipped, too eager to be casual. Mariah, right? She turned. Rena Desai, junior HR analyst. Young, polished, eyes too sharp for her job description. She held a tablet tucked to her chest like it was a shield. I think I've seen you before, Rena said, smiling carefully. Do you work evenings too? Mariah nodded. Where they need me. Rena looked like she wanted to ask more. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. Well, you always keep this place spotless. Just wanted to say that Mariah inclined her head. Appreciate it. The elevator chimed. She stepped in. Rena didn't follow, but she watched the doors close. Sublevel 2 again. The storage floor, where no one important went unless they were lost or yelling about a leak. Mariah keyed in the utility closet code. The click was soft, metallic. Inside, she pulled the mop head free and wrung it out into the sink. Her hands worked without thought. Soaked fabric, twisted fibers, rinse, repeat. She stared at the rusted shelf across from her. The box on the top was still there. A box of old documentation folders, procurement records, tech logs. Stale, but not irrelevant. She reached up, pulled it down. The folder she wanted was near the bottom. ARCHOS Legacy Deployment. Early Contributors. Her name was there. Page 4. Not Mariah Torres. Mariah Virex, NeuralSync Architecture, co-design lead. The print had faded, but not vanished. They had no idea she'd kept copies of everything the day after Anthony's funeral. Or that Anthony, in his final investor memo, had signed her onto the legacy share schedule, quietly, discreetly, just before the new board restructured her out of the company. That paper still held weight. It wasn't enough to take them down. Not yet. But it would be enough when the house started shaking. She tucked the folder away again, locked the cabinet, returned to the floor. The company was alive now, buzzing. Elevator doors opened and closed like clockwork. Executives passed her with coffee in hand and Bluetooths in ear. No one spoke to her, not unless they needed a wet sign cleaned. But she listened. At 9:32 a.m., she heard it. Server lag again. I told you it would spike under nested load. It's the buffer leak. It's crawling. And we've got that external demo next week. Mariah turned her mop gently, kept her pace even. Same issue, same pattern. The code base they had Frankensteined together from her original logic, without understanding its modular interlocks, was starting to crack under the volume of concurrent users. She knew how to fix it, but she wasn't going to. Not yet. Instead, she slipped into the side corridor near the executive break room. This hallway was lined with thin, sound-dampening panels and private access doors. One was slightly ajar, not enough to enter, just enough to hear. "We'll outsource the fix," Elliot was saying. "Don't bring that to Anthony's file archive." "I don't need legacy ghosts crawling out of the walls." Mariah's mouth tightened. That was what he called her. Once. A legacy ghost. As if her fingerprints on the company's foundations were nothing more than echoes. There was a time when she would have confronted him. Now, she understood timing. In silence. Silence was where power grew unnoticed. She turned away from the door, continued down the hallway. In the reflection of a polished wall fixture, she caught a glimpse of herself. Uniform neat, hair pulled back, eyes steady. She looked like a custodian. That was the idea. No one suspected the janitor carried board-level rights sealed under a pre-IPO clause written in a dead man's name. No one remembered who wrote the first neural stack interface because they'd all assumed the credit belonged to the men who shouted the loudest in the boardroom. But Anthony remembered, and so did the documentation. Mariah entered the elevator alone. Tomorrow she wouldn't take it down. Tomorrow she'd take it up. The elevator doors opened onto the lobby, just as the executive morning huddle broke apart. Mariah blended into the background as three men in press suits walked past her, arguing about headcounts and compliance audits. She heard Elliot's voice above the rest, crisp and amused. "She's got her kid waiting on the sidewalk every morning." "What kind of professional does that?" Laughter followed, sharp and easy. Mariah kept her head down and gripped the mop handle tighter. Luca had asked to come with her again today, said he didn't feel well, said the nurse at school looked at him like he was a burden. She couldn't afford another school meeting. She couldn't afford anything falling out of routine. Downstairs, the vending machine near the supply closet ate her last dollar without dispensing the apple juice Luca liked. She stood there for a moment, staring at the empty slot behind the glass, then turned away. She'd bring something better from home tomorrow. Something cold. Maybe with mint. His throat had been raw lately. The break was over. She moved her cart to the hallway outside the executive lounge. The smell of overbrewed coffee and lavender diffuser oil seeped through the door cracks. From inside came soft chuckles and the muffled clink of ceramic cups. She didn't need to be told she wasn't welcome in there. That space wasn't built for people like her. It had velvet seating and sculptural lighting and the kind of silence that cost money. She worked the mop in tight circles. The polish caught the morning light. Her shoulder burned from repetition, but she didn't slow down. Across the hall, the elevator dinged and opened. Out stepped Rena Desai, tablet in hand, face tense with focus. Her gaze swept the floor, paused, then doubled back. Rena approached slowly, not interrupting, hovering. "Mariah?" she said gently. Mariah glanced over her shoulder. "Morning." Rena hesitated. "Can I ask you something weird?" Mariah nodded once. "I was reviewing some old contributor files for onboarding compliance," she began, "and I saw a name that looked familiar. Not Torres. It was Virex. Mariah Virex." Mariah's hand paused on the mop. Rena continued, her voice quiet, cautious. "It said you co-authored the baseline for the original neural sync interface. That can't be a coincidence, right?" Mariah stood up straight. "That was a long time ago," she said. "But it's you?" Mariah didn't answer. She didn't have to. Rena's eyes widened, but her tone stayed composed. I didn't tell anyone. Just, I had to ask. I've been sitting on it all morning. Mariah tilted her head. Why? Because, Rena said, voice lowering. The buffer instability in the new model? It matches a structural flaw I saw mentioned in one of your archived comments. That caught her attention. Rena pressed on. They're planning a full external demo next week for potential pharma partners. If that buffer spikes again, the entire presentation could desync. Mariah looked at her for a long time. You're good, she said quietly. Rena flushed. I read a lot, but I don't know how to fix it. Not like you probably could. Silence hung in the space between them. Mariah could hear a spoon stirring tea in the lounge behind the door. Don't tell anyone what you found, she said. Rena nodded quickly. Of course. I haven't. I won't. Mariah returned to mopping. Forget you saw that name. Rena hesitated again. I just want to help. You did. The younger woman looked confused, but she didn't push further. She glanced back toward the elevator, then took a step away. Then she turned back. If you ever need anything. Mariah didn't look up. I will. Rena left. The hallway was quiet again. Mariah finished her section and steered the cart back toward the janitor's closet. Inside, she leaned the mop against the wall and opened her personal locker. She reached into the bottom shelf and retrieved a slim envelope. Creased, sealed, yellowed with age. Inside was the original letter from Anthony Virex, the one that welcomed her to the founding team, the one that assigned her 7% equity under her maiden name, locked behind legal protections he insisted on after his second diagnosis. He had called her the mind behind the bridge. She had never told anyone about the letter. She didn't need to. She still had the stock, still had the dormant board seat, still had the rights, technical, legal, financial. All she needed was a reason to activate them. And now she had one. The medication Luca needed was going off the approved formulary list. The letter from the insurer came 2 days ago. She hadn't told him. She'd planned to wait until the refill denial came through and deal with it quietly. But if the company burned next week, if that presentation failed, if the funding dried, her silence wouldn't be worth anything anymore. She folded the envelope again, placed it gently into the back of the locker, locked it, turned. Tomorrow she'd make a phone call. Not to a lawyer. Not yet. She'd start. With someone who understood how much Virexin needed to look unshakable. A third-party investor. One who knew her name. Mariah didn't take her usual route the next morning. Instead of heading straight to the janitor's supply closet, she took the long way, past the glass conference rooms and open-plan workstations on floor 2. Her cart squeaked faintly as it rolled across the polished vinyl, drawing no attention. Just another background noise in a building built to filter people like her out of sight. She passed a screen mounted on the wall outside the executive wing, an internal update from the CEO's office. It displayed phrases like investor alignment, IP roadmap, and neural recalibration Tier 4. Beneath the buzzwords, the rotating ticker scrolled quietly. Demo with pharmacize in 4 days. CTO, it must be flawless. Mariah paused to wipe a non-existent smudge off the base of the screen. Then she kept walking. The door at the end of the hall was propped open by a small wedge. Fire code violation, she noted silently. Inside was the company's innovation room, a glass and steel lab space rarely used now that public funding had shifted toward hardware. But tucked in the back, next to a row of virtual sim stations, was a legacy system terminal. One of the last still running the ARCHOS neural sim layer she had helped design. She stepped inside, checked over her shoulder, then approached the station. The login screen blinked patiently. She didn't touch it. Didn't need to. Instead, she reached under the keyboard tray and ran her fingers along the edge. Exactly where she remembered. A small ridge, a flat seam. She pressed. A tiny drawer popped out, mechanical and slow. Inside, covered in dust, sat a backup USB key in a labeled case. Arch OS Baseline, Vir M 1.0.2. Her signature was on the label. It was still here. They hadn't replaced it. They hadn't even noticed it. She slid the tray shut and walked out of the room, leaving everything exactly as it had been. No cameras in that corner. She'd made sure of that when she first designed the lab layout. Back in the hallway, she turned her cart and made her way downstairs, her face unreadable. In the sub-level break room, the vending machine light flickered above her head as she placed a call from her locked personal phone. "Hey," she said after a pause. "It's me. I need a meeting. Quiet. 2 days." The voice on the other end was surprised, but didn't ask questions. "Investor group?" it asked. "No," she replied. "One person. Just someone who knows where the bones are buried." She ended the call. Slide the phone back into the hidden panel behind the mop rack. By the time the 10 a.m. executive check-in rolled around, Mariah was back on the upper floor, sweeping near the large format windows outside the boardroom. The glass stretched from floor to ceiling, letting sunlight spill across the gold-trimmed carpet. Inside the room, Elliot paced while talking on the phone. She couldn't hear every word, but a few filtered through the half-open door. "I don't care if she worked here 10 years ago. If it's not in the system, it's not relevant. She's a janitor. We're not adjusting our architecture for the ghosts of contributors past." Mariah didn't move. She swept slowly, rhythmically. The bristles brushed against the carpet like wind against dry grass. He walked past the open doorway moments later and didn't even glance at her. That evening, after the floor cleared, she returned to the archives room on level 3, using her old badge, still functional under maintenance clearance. She unlocked the filing cabinet, labeled Tech Contributor Records. Legacy. It hadn't been touched in years. She removed a binder. Inside, in faded ink, were the onboarding logs, signed NDAS, and architecture review notes for early contributors. She flipped until she found her own. Mariah Virex, Senior Architecture Consultant. Initialed. Stamped. She pulled out her phone and took high-resolution scans of each page. Her name, her diagrams, her sign-off on the neural relay loop, all of it. She flipped to the last page, one no one ever cared about. A footnote scrawled in Anthony's handwriting. "If anything happens to me, Mariah has access to my final revisions folder. She knows what to do." She swallowed. It wasn't sentiment. It was insurance. Anthony had known how quickly boards turn cold when founders died. He'd hidden her seat in technical language, buried in source documentation in legacy design logs. Not in a headline, not in a press release. She returned the binder, locked the cabinet, and stepped back into the hallway. The building hummed with artificial light. Quiet. Still. In the reflection of the glass wall, she didn't see a janitor anymore. She saw the one person in the building who knew the architecture, the vulnerabilities, and the weaknesses better than the engineers themselves. She had created the nervous system of the company, and if she wanted, she could paralyze it. But she didn't want destruction. She wanted acknowledgement, correction, access. She wanted Luca's medication back on the formulary, and she wanted them to say her name, not the janitor, not some old contributor. Mariah Virex, co-founder, architect, silent shareholder. She turned and walked toward the elevator. A slow, steady pace. Tomorrow, the papers would be signed. The investor would make contact. The board wouldn't know it yet, But someone was already at the table. They just hadn't looked down far enough to see her. The next morning, the tension inside Virexon felt different. It didn't announce itself in alarms or sirens. It simmered in the clipped footsteps on tile, the way voices lowered when certain names were spoken, the briefcase that Elliot Crane slammed a little too hard on the executive table before the doors closed. Mariah was already inside the building, wheeling her cart toward the mezzanine floor. She didn't need to hear the memo to know something had gone wrong. She could see it on their faces. Strained, caffeinated, calculating. She passed a young systems engineer with red eyes and half-buttoned sleeves, muttering to himself. No rollback logs. Latency spike doesn't make sense. Why is it recursive now? Mariah didn't stop. At the far end of the mezzanine was the diagnostics lounge, a room rarely used outside of system-wide tests. A screen displayed a frozen error log in red. Buffer overflow. Sync fault at node 2129A. She stared at it, then looked away. It had started. By 10:17 a.m., an internal message had gone out. Urgent back-end anomaly during load testing. All senior engineers to Infra Conference Room B. Mariah knew where that was. She had helped pick the spacing for that server rack, had once run stress tests across the same pipeline. The load sync system they'd deployed, her system, had originally included 2 fail-safes. The new team had stripped one out. She knew why. Less redundancy, faster load speed, higher ROI. But that second loop had been the difference between a system that shivered under pressure and one that shattered. She took her mop and made her way toward the basement. She wasn't needed in that conference room. Not yet. In the utility locker, she changed out the mop head, placed it gently on the drying rack, then pulled out the small black pouch she'd stashed there yesterday. Inside was the copy of the baseline she'd scanned, plus the backup USB key with the first stable build. All she needed was a moment and the right person. The moment arrived sooner than expected. Rena found her near the service elevators. The young analyst's face was pale, her breathing shallow from rushing between floors. "Mariah," she whispered, glancing around. "Can I talk to you?" Mariah nodded. They stepped into the stairwell. Rena closed the door behind them, her voice already shaking. "They're spiraling. The back-end spike just replicated in a sandbox node. The CTO is talking about calling in a third-party emergency firm." Mariah said nothing. "They can't figure it out," Rena continued. "It's like the spike is feeding on itself. One of the data mirrors just failed. They're going to lose uptime during the demo next week if they don't stop it now." Mariah finally looked at her. "They won't stop it." Rena blinked. "But why not?" "Because they think it's beneath them to admit they don't understand the system they stole," she said, her tone calm. Rena's breath caught. "You know how to fix it, don't you?" Mariah didn't answer. She didn't need to. The weight of her silence settled between them like a loaded vault door. "I shouldn't be asking," Rena whispered. "I know I shouldn't. But if you have something, anything, that can help, maybe I can get them to listen. You don't have to. Go in there." Mariah reached into the pouch and handed her the black USB key. "Give this to the CTO," she said. "If they run a ghost sim with this version, they'll see the buffer loops are collapsing because of the second interlock being removed." Rena turned the device in her hand, reverent. "Why would you give this to me?" "Because," Mariah said, "you haven't tried to own something that wasn't yours." Rena swallowed. "What do I tell them?" "Tell them it came from an old archive Anthony left behind," Mariah replied. "That's not a lie." Rena nodded slowly, her voice a whisper. You could step in. You could lead this." Mariah looked away. "Not yet." She turned and left the stairwell, her steps deliberate. As the door closed behind her, Rena was left alone with a decision. Upstairs, the diagnostics conference was fraying. One engineer threw his pen down on the table. Elliot paced like a tiger in a glass cage. "We're not pushing anything from anonymous sources," he snapped. "We don't need ancient backups or dusty scripts from the archives." The CTO wiped his forehead. "If the demo fails, we lose pharmacists. If we lose pharmacists, we lose Series E. If we lose Series E..." "I said no," Elliot barked. That's when Rena stepped into the room. All eyes turned. She walked straight to the table, placed the USB drive down, and said, "This isn't from a stranger." Elliot stared at it. "What is that?" She didn't blink. "It's from someone Anthony Vierex trusted. Someone who designed the loop structure you're now watching collapse." The room went silent. The CTO reached for the drive. Elliot stepped in his way. "Where did this come from?" Rena looked directly at him. "From the woman whose name used to be on the neural sync patent. The one you mock in the parking lot every morning." Elliot's smile cracked. The CTO inserted the drive into a secure system port. 2 minutes later, the simulation stabilized. On screen, the node cascade resolved. Latency dropped, sync restored. No one spoke, because suddenly, the most valuable asset in the building wasn't on the payroll, and she'd been cleaning their floors all along. Mariah was wiping down the elevator panel when the CTO brushed past her like she didn't exist. His expression was tight, eyes glassy with disbelief. He held the USB key in one hand like it was radioactive. He didn't say anything. Not to her, not to anyone. But his silence spoke loud enough. She'd felt the shift begin the moment Rena walked into that room. Now it was spreading. 3 engineers glanced at her as she passed them in the main corridor. Not out of disrespect this time, but something closer to caution. One of them nodded, hesitant, unsure. Mariah didn't return the gesture. She wasn't ready to be seen yet. Not until they had no choice but to look. Back in the janitor's closet, she locked the empty pouch in the supply cabinet and retrieved her binder of legacy documents. The internal memo she expected hadn't arrived yet, but the damage had already begun. The system had stabilized, the SIM had worked, and the one thing Elliot couldn't explain was how a failure they'd thrown money at for weeks had been fixed in minutes by a drive that didn't exist in their documentation. He wouldn't be able to bury it, at least, not without someone noticing the smell. Mariah stood in front of the wall mirror, bolted to the inside of her locker. She tied her hair back tighter, smoothed her shirt collar. She looked tired, the kind of tired no amount of sleep touched. But behind her reflection, for the first time in years, was momentum. By noon, murmurs floated down through the building like heat through ductwork. Someone in operations was asking about the legacy key. Compliance had flagged the SimLog metadata. The CTO hadn't spoken a word since retreating into his office. And Elliot had stopped pacing and started pressing. Rena found Mariah just after lunch, near the lower-level mailroom. "They know," she said, breathless. Mariah didn't pause in her work. "What do they know?" "They traced the drive signature. It's still labeled under your developer tag. They have the archived code history. Some of the executives are demanding answers." Mariah finished, taping a box shut. "Let them ask. They're saying you breached protocol." Mariah looked up. "The protocol they breached first?" Rena's voice dropped. "They're scared, Mariah." "They should be." Rena hesitated, then held out a folded paper. "This came down from legal." Mariah opened it. "Read it once." No reaction. "Request for internal disclosure. Technology origin investigation." "Elliot wants to frame it as a security flaw," Rena added. He's going to paint it like a rogue element, like you're unstable or vindictive. Mariah folded the letter in half. Then he'll have to explain how a vindictive janitor authored the exact fix they couldn't. She walked away without another word. Rena didn't follow. Upstairs, in the boardroom, Elliot stood alone at the end of the long table. He was reading from a tablet, jaw clenched. His reflection on the polished surface below looked tired, but not uncertain. He wasn't worried about the tech. He was worried about the narrative. He tapped the intercom button on the desk. "Get me Gregory Latham. I want to revisit that inactive clause in the contributor agreement. The one about retroactive revocation." A voice replied, "Sir, that clause expired 4 years ago." Elliot's hand curled slowly into a fist. In the legal wing, 2 compliance officers reviewed the old records. Flipping pages from the scanned legacy logs, one paused. "This name again?" she murmured. "Mariah Virex. Listed under co-architecture, co-founder by designation. Silent shareholder under Clause 11. A. Pre-IPO rights. Package. Still valid." "Should we alert the board?" her partner asked. The first woman leaned back. "She never activated her board seat. She's been on campus all this time, cleaning, working." Her voice softened. "What does that say about us?" That afternoon, Mariah entered the hallway outside the executive lounge again. She didn't have her cart, just her clipboard and keys. Inside the lounge, Elliot was speaking with the CTO in hushed, clipped tones. Mariah waited just outside the door, visible through the frosted glass. She wanted him to see her, to feel her standing there, to recognize the pressure building behind every polite silence she'd ever given him. When he finally turned and met her eyes, he didn't speak, but something in his expression shifted. It wasn't recognition. It was realization. She turned away first. Downstairs, she clocked out 5 minutes early, picked up Luca from the side bench. He was bundled in his favorite hoodie, the sleeves too long, a book clutched in his hands. "How was today?" she asked. He shrugged. "They made us do math." "I was faster than the app," Mariah smiled. "Of course you were." As they walked toward the street, she didn't look back at the building. But inside, Elliot Crane was already scrambling, reviewing contracts, whispering to counsel, emailing contacts from a secure line. He could feel it now. The walls were shifting. The ground was changing. And the woman he'd called invisible had just shown him exactly where she stood. The next morning, Mariah didn't enter through the service entrance. She walked in through the main glass doors of Virexon Biotech with the rest of the employees. Head high, uniform crisp, her badge clipped just as it had always been. But this time, she didn't keep her eyes down. And this time, people noticed. Not everyone. Not yet. But enough. A pair of junior developers standing near the elevator bank gave her a double take. One whispered something to the other. A third engineer from systems froze as he recognized her face. Saw the same woman who had handed him a lint roller 2 weeks ago, now walking past the front desk with the quiet confidence of someone who knew where every fiber optic cable in the building was buried. Mariah didn't stop, didn't flinch. She had a meeting in 30 minutes. And it wasn't about cleaning schedules. She stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the top floor, Executive Suites. The receptionist at the 12th floor looked up with a start when the doors opened. "Can I help?" "I'm expected," Mariah said calmly. She slid an envelope across the desk. Inside, a notarized reactivation request for board seat 2B, as assigned under the dormant equity clause of Virexon's original founding documents. The receptionist blinked. I'll notify Mr. Crane." "You do that." Mariah turned away before the woman could respond. At the far end of the corridor was a glass-paneled waiting lounge reserved for visiting investors. It was empty. She took a seat, crossed her legs, set her phone on the side table. From this angle, she could see the edge of the founder's portrait hanging above the hallway, Anthony Virex, seated in front of an early neural map of the ARCHOS system. Her system. They'd removed her signature from the diagram before publishing it in press packets, but they hadn't removed it from the original filings. 10 minutes later, the elevator dinged again. Rena Desai stepped out, her hands full of documents, her expression a mixture of awe and relief. "I wasn't sure you'd come up," she said. "I didn't climb," Mariah replied. "I just stopped hiding." Rena handed over a folder. "These are the recognition documents you requested. Legal signed off. Your shareholding position activates immediately. You'll have full voting rights by end of day." Mariah opened the folder. Her name stared back at her. Mariah Virex Torres, shareholder Class A. Beneath it, a valuation number that would have once made her hands shake. Now it felt deserved, earned, long overdue. Rena sat beside her. They're in a tailspin. Elliot's been trying to convene a private board meeting for damage control. But the others are asking questions. Someone from compliance forwarded your co-authorship logs to the chair. "There's no burying it now," Mariah nodded. "Good. Do you want to speak to them today?" "No," she said. "Let them wait." Rena smiled faintly, but there was concern behind it. "He's not going to go quietly." Elliot's cornered. Mariah met her eyes. "Then he's in the perfect position to listen." Downstairs, Elliot Crane slammed his office door after another call with the CTO yielded nothing but silence. The patch had held. The systems were stable. But the narrative? That was falling apart. He scrolled through his inbox. 6 new messages with Mariah's name in the subject line. 3 from legal, 2 from investor relations, 1 from the CEO's assistant. All flagged urgent, all referencing documents he had dismissed as irrelevant history just a week ago. A knock on the glass interrupted him. The receptionist stepped in. "Mr. Crane." "She's here." Elliot stood slowly. "She who?" "Mariah Torres." She filed official reactivation for her seat. Elliot felt his pulse hammer in his throat. "Under what grounds?" The receptionist held up the folder. "Founding contribution. Anthony's legacy clause. It's valid?" He snatched it from her hands. Then froze. Because there it was. The signature he couldn't erase. The proof he couldn't refute. The woman he had mocked, the janitor he had dismissed, was about to sit at the table he once called his own. He dropped the folder on his desk like it was burning. Upstairs, Mariah stood in front of the window, watching the city stretch toward the horizon. The sky was sharp, cloudless. Cold light ran across. The rooftops like wire. "Have the other board members been notified?" she asked. Rena nodded. "They've scheduled an emergency review. Not public, but they'll need to acknowledge your reinstatement before the demo." Mariah smiled. "Perfect timing. Are you planning to attend the demo?" Mariah didn't answer. Instead, she walked to the coffee station, poured herself a cup, and stirred it slowly. She had served coffee in this building before. To men who couldn't look her in the eye. Now they would sit across from her and listen. Not because she demanded it, but because she had something they could no longer afford to ignore. The boardroom was unusually quiet. Not empty. Every seat was filled. But no one spoke. The tension wasn't loud. It was restrained, orderly, suffocating. Like everyone knew the page was about to turn. But no one dared touch the corner. Mariah entered without waiting to be announced. She wore no suit, no heels, no dramatic makeover. Just her pressed janitor uniform and the same name badge that had gone unnoticed for years. She walked to the chair reserved for seat 2B, unfolded the nameplate that had been hastily printed that morning. and sat. No one stopped her. The board chair, a man with a careful voice and a politician's face, cleared his throat. "Mariah Torres," he began, "thank you for attending. We've reviewed your reinstatement papers. All documents are correct," Mariah said. He paused, caught, then nodded. "Yes, correct. You are officially recognized as a founding shareholder and board member. Your voting rights have been restored effective immediately." A few seats down, Elliot Crane sat still, arms crossed. Mariah didn't look at him. "I'm here to observe," she said. "For now." "Of course," the chair replied, relieved. "Today's session will focus on the status of the demo with pharmacists and infrastructure recovery." The meeting moved forward. Charts were presented. Engineers gave sanitized status updates. Financial projections were reevaluated. A revised timeline for rollout was proposed. Mariah said nothing, but every time someone mentioned the restored systems, she watched Elliot flinch. He was quieter now, not the swaggering voice he had been even a week ago. His comments were clipped, defensive. His usual allies around the table were less eager to nod along. The air around him had changed. After the meeting, as the others filtered out, Elliot stood. "You've made your point," he said. Mariah didn't stand. "I haven't said a word." "You don't need to." "You've already poisoned the room." She looked at him then. Really looked. His suit was perfect, as always, but his skin was pale. His jaw clenched too tightly. There was a sheen of sweat at his collar. "Funny," she said. "For years, I cleaned the dust off your glass. Never realized how fragile you were behind it." He stepped closer. "I don't know what game you're playing." "I'm not," she interrupted. "You are. You've always been. That's the problem." He hesitated. "You really think you can walk in here and rewrite history?" "I'm not rewriting it," she said. "I'm reclaiming it." He tried to laugh. It came out hollow. "You think the board cares about old paperwork? Legacy contracts? They want stability, predictability, a name on an investor list. They don't want a janitor in their earnings reports." Mariah stood slowly. "Then they'll have to choose," she said, "between the truth and the version you sold them." "And this time, I brought the receipts." She walked past him without waiting for a response. Downstairs, Rena was waiting. "How did it go?" she asked. Mariah handed her a folder. "Prep this for the next session. I want a full shareholder briefing on the legacy architecture path. They're going to understand what they've been sitting on." Rena opened the folder. Her eyes widened slightly. "This is the original mapping?" Mariah nodded. "With annotations." "Including the interlocks they stripped out." Rena looked up. "You're really going to open this to the room?" "I'm going to give them a choice," Mariah said. "They can continue bleeding resources, trying to patch holes they don't understand. Or they can let me restore the system I built, under my terms." "And if they refuse?" Mariah's voice was calm. "Then I sell my shares." Rena's eyes widened. "That would tank confidence. It would also raise questions, and I've got answers, documented, archived, time-stamped." Rena held the folder tighter. "You've been planning this." Mariah turned to the window. Outside, the sun caught on the mirrored surface of the building across the street. In its reflection, the Virexen logo shimmered, sharp, sterile, immaculate. "No," she said. "I've been surviving this." She looked down at her hands, calloused, steady. The same hands that had written the first lines of neural mapping code in a server closet during midnight shifts, long before the company had a real budget. The same hands that cleaned after people who never knew her name. But now her name was everywhere. In emails, in internal memos, in whispers, in fear. That night at home, she made dinner for Luca. Nothing fancy, just soup and toast, his favorite. He sat at the kitchen table, feet dangling, sketching something on a sheet of lined paper. "Is this your building?" he asked, turning the paper toward her. It was a child's drawing of Virexon, lopsided, too many windows, the flag waving on the roof, but at the very top was a figure with a clipboard. Smiling, Mariah smiled back. "Not mine," she said, "but I helped build it." He grinned. "Can I come with you tomorrow?" "Soon," she said. "Maybe not with a backpack. Maybe with a visitor badge." His eyes lit up. She watched him eat, and for the first time in a long time. The future didn't feel like a door she had to sneak through. It felt like something she could walk into. Front entrance, head high. Tomorrow she'd wear the same uniform. But everything else had changed. The next morning, the sky broke gold over the skyline. Mariah didn't take the bus. She pulled up in a black Audi A6, modest by executive standards. But it wasn't the make that turned heads. It was the way she stepped out, calm, measured, like she'd always belonged in that spot. Like this wasn't her first time driving into a building she once helped architect. Only the first time they recognized it. The valet froze for half a beat before reaching for the door. "Welcome," he said, eyes uncertain. Mariah offered a polite nod and walked past him, her heels tapping softly across the concrete. She wasn't in uniform today. No mop cart, no supply key. Just tailored black slacks, a navy coat, and the calm clarity of a woman no longer pretending she didn't remember every circuit behind the glass. Inside the lobby, heads turned. The receptionist stood. "Ms. Torres?" she said quickly, voice sharper than yesterday. "We've been expecting you. Boardroom access is already cleared. Would you like—" "No," Mariah said gently. "I know the way." She walked across the floor where she used to mop up morning coffee spills, past the chrome directory where her name never appeared, past the art installation they once commissioned to represent emergent systems, a concept she herself had introduced in an old design memo, long since buried in corporate PR. No one blocked her path now. By the time she reached the executive floor, Elliot Crane was already waiting. He stood at the far end of the hallway, arms folded, jaw locked, posture military. This time, he didn't smirk. "You've made your entrance," he said. Mariah stopped a few feet from him. "And yet, I haven't said a word." "You've said enough, with your silence, with your files, with your choice to grandstand through back channels. I used the same channels you closed me out of," she replied. "The only difference is this time. You weren't holding the lock." He stepped closer. "Do you know what you're doing, Mariah? Really? You think this company needs your old code and dusty memos? You think Pharmacize cares who you were?" She met his stare without blinking. "I think they'll care who I am now." He scoffed. "You're a threat to stability." "No," she said. "I'm the one thing in this building that was stable before you cut out every safeguard for speed and image." A pause. "You're afraid?" she added. He didn't deny it. The boardroom doors were open when she entered. The table gleamed beneath recessed lighting. The seats were full. CTO, CFO, board chair, legal counsel. No one looked surprised to see her anymore. Rena sat near the end, her tablet ready, her shoulders straight. "Before we begin," the chair said, "we'd like to formally acknowledge Ms. Mariah Virex Torres as the original co-architect of ARCHOS and a voting shareholder." Mariah nodded, taking her seat. "We're also aware," he continued, "that in light of her technical intervention earlier this week, in her documented rights under Anthony Virex's legacy clauses, her standing as a contributor is not only valid, but critical." Elliot shifted in his seat. "Ms. Torres," the chair said, You requested this session to present your terms. Mariah opened the folder in front of her and passed copies down both sides of the table. 3 items, she said. First, I want a formal correction to public-facing documents regarding the origin of ARCHOS, acknowledgement of my role, both in patent record and investor statements. Reasonable, said the legal counsel, without hesitation. Second, she continued, I want Virexon's healthcare coverage revised to reinstate orphan drug tier funding. The new formulary exclusions are a risk to employee families and a moral failure. The CFO looked surprised. You're leveraging board power for a drug policy revision? Mariah didn't blink. I'm saving my son's life. Silence. Third, she said, I want a full review of all current neural architecture deployments. If there are more stripped redundancies, I want the option to oversee fixes, quietly, internally. The CTO shifted uncomfortably. That could require restructuring multiple deployments. Mariah met his gaze. Then restructure. The chair glanced at the rest of the board. Any objections? No one spoke. Mariah leaned back, and for the first time since she had been erased, she allowed herself to sit, not as an outsider watching the machine move without her, but as the one who helped build its bones and now controlled its course. Across the table, Elliot watched, jaw tight. He wasn't fired. Not yet, but he was no longer in control. And that was worse. For him, later that day, Mariah returned to her usual floor. Not because she had to, because she wanted to see it one more time before everything changed. The mop closet smelled the same. Faint bleach, metal, heat from the walls. She stepped inside and looked at the locker where she'd once stored her thermos and backup shoes. It was still there, still humming with the memories of silence, sacrifice, and survival. She reached in and pulled out her old keyring, ran her thumb along the smooth, worn edges, then left it behind. On her way out, she passed the founder's plaque again. Someone had cleaned it that morning, but this time, someone had added a small black and white nameplate just below the frame. Mariah Virex Torres, co-architect, Archos. She stood still for a moment, not to admire it, just to acknowledge it. Then she turned and walked back toward the future she had already earned. The lobby was packed. Not with reporters, yet, but with investors, engineers, legal observers, and the pharma executives flown in for the demonstration. A dozen suits hovered near the front reception, murmuring over tablets and printed agendas. The air carried the sterile, over-rehearsed energy of damage control, disguised as confidence. Mariah stood at the far end of the mezzanine level, just out of sight. She wasn't here to grandstand. She was here to watch. Below her, a digital banner above the main display screen rotated through slides for Pharmacist Demo Day. Phrases like neural sync at scale and optimized cognitive mapping shimmered across the LED wall. She knew every word was scripted by someone who hadn't written a line of code in years. Elliot stood at the center of the cluster, jaw tight, shoulders back. He was dressed for war, navy power suit, flawless collar, a silver pin on his lapel that caught every bit of light. He still thought he could own the room. He hadn't realized that room no longer belonged to him. The board had approved Mariah's terms the night before. Her reinstatement was official. Her name was now included on all technical documentation surrounding the neural loop systems. The healthcare adjustment policy had been filed. Her presence was no longer a threat. It was a legal fact. But Elliot had refused to cancel the demo. He was betting that if the system held under pressure, he could spin the week's chaos as a momentary technical hiccup. That his narrative, that he had saved Virexon from a legacy flaw, might still stick. He wasn't counting on the final slide Mariah had slipped into the deck, or the hands that had let it through. The lights dimmed. The demo began. Elliot took the stage with a winning smile and a firm grip on the microphone. "Thank you all for joining us at Virexon," he began. "Today, we're excited to showcase the stability, scale, and brilliance of our neural mapping systems, one of the most advanced synchronization platforms in the biotech sector." Slides clicked behind him. Graphs simulations. A live test node pulsing in real time across a display wall. "We've overcome legacy challenges," Elliot continued, "and rebuilt ARCHOS into a platform that not only supports real-time mapping, but evolves with it." Mariah crossed her arms. He still hadn't said her name. Not even once. A few rows behind the stage, the CTO sat stiffly, eyes darting to the edge of the screen. He knew what was coming. Slide 18. It looked like the others. Code segments, heat maps, user sync charts. But this one had a footer, and the footer said, Source Architecture, ARCHOSV 1.0.2. Co-designed by M. Virex Torres. The change was subtle. No bold font, no flashing animation, but it was there, and it hit harder than a headline. Whispers spread across the room within seconds. Investors glanced at one another. Pharmacist execs leaned toward their tablets. A few scrolled rapidly, searching the name. One nodded slowly. Another raised a brow. Mariah didn't smile. She simply watched Elliot pause, just for a fraction of a second, as the screen behind him held steady. He knew. He had seen it. But to address it now would be to validate it. So he moved on, pretended it hadn't happened. Mariah turned and walked away. Upstairs, in the boardroom, the chair watched the live stream on a wall-mounted screen. When Mariah entered, he stood. "You added it," he said. "I didn't lie," she replied. "It's the truth. They deserve to see it." He nodded. "We agreed to your conditions, but I wasn't sure you'd press it this quickly." "Elliot pressed first," she said. "I'm just reminding them where the line was drawn." He gestured to the seats. "Will you be joining the second session?" "No," Mariah said. "This part doesn't need me." He looked at her carefully. "You're not here to take the company back, are you?" "No," she said. "I'm here to make sure it doesn't forget who built it." By afternoon, the company was buzzing. The demo had gone smoothly, at least technically. But the conversations afterward had shifted. Where before there had been whispered rumors about the janitor with a past, now there were verified credentials, legal documents, digital proof. Engineers began citing her original white paper, freshly reposted in the internal knowledge base. Rena had quietly ensured it was linked to the new onboarding materials. Mariah's name was no longer a question mark. It was a foundation. Elliot spent the rest of the day locked in his office, blinds drawn. The CEO hadn't answered his last two calls. Pharmacist had requested a follow-up meeting. Without him, he stared at the same slide over and over again. M. Virex Torres. The name wasn't loud. It didn't gloat. It just existed, unavoidable, undeniable, like the truth he had buried for years. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the buildings, Mariah took the long walk home with Luca. He skipped ahead of her, swinging his arms, humming something she didn't recognize. "Did they like your work?" he asked suddenly. Mariah looked at him. "Who?" "The people at your job." She paused. "They didn't used to," she said. "But now they remember it." Luca frowned, then smiled. "That's good." He held her hand as they crossed the street. Mariah didn't look back. She didn't need to. They would remember her now. And not just because she fixed what they broke, but because she never let them erase what she built. Elliot Crane stood in the boardroom, but he wasn't at the head of the table. That seat was empty now, symbolically, if not formally. His usual spot had been taken by the general counsel, and the CFO had started to direct the agenda items Elliot once claimed with ease. The air was thinner than usual, the conversation restrained. It wasn't a formal removal, not yet, but the balance had shifted, and everyone in that room could feel it. At the far end, Mariah sat quietly. She hadn't spoken once, not since entering. No dramatic statements, no rebukes. She didn't need them. Her silence had more weight now than Elliot's best rehearsed defense. The board chair glanced at her. "We're entering the final item." Governance review. Elliot raised a hand before anyone else could speak. "Before we proceed, I'd like to address the board directly." The room paused. No objections. A nod allowed him the floor. Elliot stood, buttoned his jacket with a practiced hand, and faced the table. "Over the last week," he began, "we've endured what I can only describe as reputational turbulence. Legacy documents have resurfaced, authorship questions raised, governance challenged, but we are a company that values evolution. Our architecture, our leadership, these things must adapt to survive." He paused, waiting for the usual nods. They didn't come. He pushed on. "That said, I acknowledge the omission in our public record. Ms. Torres's contributions to ARCHOS were foundational. That's clear now. She deserves credit for the system that brought us this far." A glance toward her. Mariah didn't move. Elliot's jaw worked. But one word. A mistake. The board chair raised a brow. "But I believe," Elliot said carefully, "that emotional investment, while understandable, should not compromise operational efficiency. Legacy contributors, no matter how impactful, should be recognized, yes, but not necessarily empowered beyond their current strategic value." A murmur passed through the room, subtle, uneasy. Mariah looked up. Her voice, when it came, was calm, even. "I understand." Elliot straightened slightly, as if her agreement proved something. "I understand what you're trying to do," she continued. "I've watched it for years. You reduce people to timelines, call them legacy, archive their relevance, and then, when you think no one's watching, you rewrite the narrative without them." She laid a folder flat on the table. Inside, time-stamped email records, original commit logs, signed onboarding statements, some with Anthony's personal notes still visible in the margins. "I'm not a ghost," she said. "I'm a living architect. And the system you're still profiting from has my name etched into its spine, whether you print it or not." Silence. "Strategic value isn't about proximity to power," she added. "It's about consequence. I walked into this building carrying the solution you failed to find in 3 weeks. I didn't just fix the glitch. I stabilized your funding round. I restored your demo. And I never asked for your job." She looked directly at Elliot. "I asked for recognition and a seat. You're lucky that's all I wanted." The chair cleared his throat, the tension in the room snapping like dry wood. "We'll now proceed with the governance vote," he said. One by one, hands went up. To ratify Mariah's board seat, to formalize her technical advisor role, to initiate an internal review of decisions made under Elliot's unilateral authority. He didn't look surprised. He just sat down, face carved into silence. Later, in the hallway, he caught up with her. She didn't slow. "You've made your point?" he said quietly. Mariah stopped. "Did I?" she asked. He searched her face. "I wasn't trying to erase you." "No," she replied. "You were trying to replace me." "That's worse." He exhaled. "You could bury me if you wanted to." "I don't need to," she said. "You did that yourself." She turned and walked away. The internal memo went out that afternoon. Subject: Legacy Correction and Governance Update. Mariah's name appeared 3 times in the first paragraph. It was written in the same font as every other announcement. No bold, no highlight, but it was permanent. Rhina sent her a screenshot. Finally, she wrote. They said it. Mariah didn't reply. She was already home. That evening, she sat on the floor with Luca, helping him build a model of the solar system out of foam balls and wire. He held up Jupiter, eyes wide. Is this the biggest one? She nodded. It's heavy. But it holds a lot together. Like you? She smiled. Maybe. He tilted his head. Can I take this to school tomorrow? Of course, she said. You built it. He leaned against her shoulder. Outside the window, the city lights blinked. Inside, the story had shifted. And this time, she wasn't on the edges of the page. She was in the credits, exactly where she belonged. The next morning, Mariah arrived early. Not because she had to, because she wanted to. There was a weight to the silence of the building before it woke, before the suits filled the corridors, before the screens flickered on with metrics and margins and pressure. She walked past the front desk, past the polished floors she used to clean, past the founder's plaque that now bore her name. She paused, only for a moment. Then she took the elevator to the executive floor. The boardroom was empty. Sunlight streamed across the table's glossy surface, catching the fine dust motes in the air. She ran her fingers along the back of the chair she once thought she'd never touch again. It wasn't just a chair now. It was a symbol. She didn't sit. Instead, she walked into the conference alcove where the archival wall had been rebuilt. The Reed design had come through late last night. Rena had sent a mock-up. There, beside the timeline of product launches in founder milestones, a new display had been installed. ARCHOS. Genesis Code contributors, Anthony Virex, Mariah Virex, Torres beneath it. A paragraph etched in steel. This system was born from vision, but it was built with hands that refused to be forgotten. She stared at it for a long time, not for validation, for closure. Downstairs, the day began like any other. People buzzed, key cards pinged, presentation decks were refined for investors who'd never read them. But there was a new rhythm now, a new name in the air. She'd already received 3 internal requests for architecture consulting, 2 mentorship invitations from the engineering team, and a soft nudge from legal asking whether she'd consider speaking at the next investor Q&A. She replied with a single sentence, "I'll speak when the company is ready to listen." At noon, she left the building, not in defeat, but in decision. She didn't need to be on site every day now. She had a seat at the table. The paper trail was clean. Her legacy had been returned. And the boy waiting outside the revolving glass doors had reminded her of what mattered more. Luca held a sketch pad. On the first page was a drawing, the Virexon Tower, this time with a nameplate that read, Mom's Work. He looked up at her. "Can we go to the park?" Mariah smiled. "We can go wherever we want." They walked together, his small hand wrapped in hers, the weight of survival finally loosening its grip. As they passed the corner of the building, a junior engineer caught her eye from across the street. He raised a hand, awkward, hesitant. She raised hers in return. That night, she sat at the kitchen table, staring at a blank page. A legal pad, pen in hand, no mop in sight, no badge clipped to her chest. Just Mariah, present. She began to write. Not code this time. Not legal notes or rebuttals. A letter. To herself. The woman who kept showing up. Who kept sweeping up pieces of a legacy others tried to scatter. The woman who never raised her voice, but raised a whole system when no one believed in her. The woman who was never just a janitor. And never needed a stage to change the narrative. She folded the paper, tucked it into a drawer, then turned off the light. The house was quiet. Luca was asleep. The city breathed behind the windows. But the story? The story was wide awake. It would travel now. It would be told in rooms where her name had once been erased, shared in whispers, meetings, presentations. And someone, someday, would ask, "Who helped build this?" And the answer would no longer begin with hesitation. It would begin with her. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been dismissed because of where you stood, if you've ever had to wait for justice with your back bent and your voice buried, let this story be your reminder. You are not invisible. You are just gathering strength. Subscribe, and don't miss our next story. CEO's daughter insulted the single mom janitor for her old clothes. Didn't know she designed the dress, winning the fashion show. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?